I'd like to welcome everybody to the Midwifery Advisory Council meeting. I'm Carrie Sparavon and I chair this committee. I'd like to remind everyone to either turn your cell phones off or set them to vibrate. This meeting is being webcasted. If you would like to provide public comment, please fill out a speaker form. They're located in the back, and hand it to Miss Sewell, who will raise her hand. She's in the back there. If you come up to speak, please identify yourself and come forward to speak. Don't stand in your seat to talk to us. I'd like to remind the MAC members that during today's meeting and all future meetings, any items requiring a vote will be done by roll call vote. This means that once a motion is made and seconded, Ms. Lowe will call each of our names individually to request our votes, which time you can vote in favor, against, or abstain. Anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Ms. Lowe, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Adams, Ms. Dugan,
Here.
Ms. Holzer,
Here.
Ms. Marcelin, Ms. Yaroslavsky,
Present.
Ms. Sparavon.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Okay. I just want everybody to understand that the council cannot discuss or take action on any matter raised during this agenda item in the public comment section, except to decide whether or not to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Looks like Sarah Mason would like to speak.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Mason. I'm a consultant to the Senate Committee on Business, Professions, and Economic Development. Our committee has oversight jurisdiction for the medical board and midwifery issues, and the council. Just wanted to give you my name and let you know that I'm here to be a resource to the council and obviously to the profession and stakeholders as you navigate through the legislative process, obviously, through regulations and the regulatory process. We're happy to be a resource and provide any information that we can as you move forward in your work and efforts. Happy to answer questions, and also just we'll be here and appreciate your work.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Karen?
Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife. I just wanted to get on record that there has been another bill introduced for certified nurse midwives. I would like the Midwifery Council to keep that under advisement and get updated about it so that we perhaps could take a position as it goes along. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. We're going to move forward to agenda item 3, which is approval of the December 1st, 2016 Midwifery Advisory Council meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second. Ms. Lowe, you got no edits? Are there any edits from the council now? No. All right. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, Ms. Lowe, will you take the roll call vote, please?
Dr. Adams, Ms. Dugan,
Approve.
Ms. Holzer,
Approve.
Ms. Marcelin,
Approve.
Ms. Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
Ms. Sparavon.
Approve. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is the chair's report, which is mine. I just wanted to mention so that people are aware, I don't have a long report today, but American River College, Community College in Sacramento, is working towards opening a licensed midwifery program. So everybody can kind of just think about that for the future, and I think it's kind of exciting news, so just wanted to bring it forward today. And that's really all I have that's not on the agenda in other places. Is there any public comment? Any council comment? Seeing none, we're going to move forward. Ms. Webb, will you do an update on the Midwifery Task Force meeting, please?
Yes, thank you. I am going to be speaking where Ms. Kirkmeyer thought she was going to be speaking. She had a conflict arise. So I am providing the update on the Midwifery Task Force meeting, which was held on Monday, March 6th, 2017, with representatives from ACOG and CALM and board staff and 2 board members, Dr. Levine and Dr. Bolot. And this was to discuss the current status of regulations to define pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy and significant disease arising from the pregnancy under Business and Professions Code Section 2507. The parties discussed the challenges created by the current language under 2507B2, requiring a licensed midwife to refer a client with a pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy or a significant disease arising from the pregnancy to a physician and surgeon for an examination and a determination by the physician that the risk factors presented by the woman's disease or condition were not likely to significantly affect the course of the pregnancy and childbirth if the midwife was to be allowed to continue care. The task force was informed that requiring physicians to make this determination puts physicians in a difficult position, causing reluctance and challenges for collaboration and access to care for midwifery clients. It was acknowledged that this issue could not be resolved through regulations. The current plan is to propose language for a legislative fix so that if the woman has a pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy or a significant disease arising from the pregnancy, the midwife will still be required to refer the woman to a physician trained in obstetrics for an assessment of the risk factors that may adversely affect the outcome of the pregnancy or childbirth. The midwife would have to include the assessment in evaluating whether the woman's disease or condition are likely to significantly affect the course of the pregnancy or childbirth. Thus, it would be the midwife making that determination within the midwifery standard of care rather than the physician as to whether the woman should continue with midwifery care. If the woman does have a pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy or a significant disease arising from the pregnancy, likely to significantly affect the course of pregnancy or childbirth. I know this is law, it's not always easy to read or hear. The midwife would have to refer the woman to a physician and surgeon for care, with the midwife providing collaborative care as appropriate. We do not anticipate at this time that the rest of 2507 would change significantly. If the statute is successfully changed, then board staff will move forward with proposed regulations to define pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy and significant disease arising from the pregnancy. Conditions falling within the definitions put forth in regulations, which would include a prior cesarean section, would prompt the referral to the physician for the assessment of the risk factors and, when appropriate, for the transfer of care. Consumer protection is paramount, and the interested parties approach consumer protection from different angles. This sometimes makes reaching agreements challenging, and there will be ongoing discussions. Nonetheless, staff believes that the task force meeting was beneficial, and we are hopeful that a compromise can be reached that serves the paramount mission of consumer protection while not creating unnecessary hurdles for access to midwifery care. And that concludes the update.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the council?
Yeah, I would like to say that I still feel as the public member here that the decision should be in the hands of the patient. I think this is a better step, certainly. But I would just like to go on record that I feel like self-determination in your own care is of paramount importance to the consumer, and keeping consumers safe, part of that is access to care and allowing them to self-determine their care, or at least choose their provider.
Thank you.
I have a comment. I did not hear, I heard that the midwife must refer. I did not hear that the client must go. So it sounds to me as though there's still that choice. And that's what I understood.
If the midwife has determined that the client has one of the conditions that takes them out of normal, the midwife would have to make that referral and could not continue care without having the assessment.
This is all up for discussion at the statutory level at this point. Am I
Right.
correct on that?
Yeah,
Okay,
I mean,
thank
this
you.
is
We're going back to the
complicated.
drawing board in a way.
right.
So what guidance do we have at this moment? The green light is on, so,
Kiss it.
okay. So what guidance do we have at this point as midwives? Without having to read that whole thing over again, sorry.
So the question is not what you have guidance as, is what does the law have the opportunity of informing midwives for?
Well,
So
yes,
you
that's,
just keep in perspective.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you're basically asking, what do midwives do in terms of their practice between now and when we have a statutory change or redirection?
In other
Is that
words,
right?
we're still in that catch-22 area that we were for 20 years regarding physician supervision, and I just want to congratulate all the parties who were involved in the task force to the timeliness of recognizing the futility of regulatory language and the progress towards legislation.
So what guides midwives now? You're bound to follow the statute and use the midwifery standard of care in determining whether the client falls within normal. Now, there's not regulations right now that creates a list that helps to do that, but if there's a complaint, then the board will retain a midwife consultant to evaluate the decisions and actions made by that midwife to determine whether he or she acted within the standard of care in taking on that client and retaining that client if there's a change during the course. So if the standard of care was not followed, then that will progress for further disciplinary action as appropriate.
So are you referring us then to the document that used to be the standard of care and now is guidelines or something that we can use that as a way to at least have some informed decision making about what might be considered outside our care?
Right, you're going
The
to be
one that's on the
using
website.
all of your training and experience and the tools that are at your disposal, which will include those guidelines. And you need to be aware of the requirements that currently exist in statute and make sure you're complying with them. But all of those things help to inform your decision as to whether you're in compliance with the statute.
Okay, got it.
One further question was, at this point, when we make a referral, that is a requirement on our part, but how do we know what the doctor said? Is there any requirement on their part to communicate back to us? Because so far, that has been the lacking piece. And when we go forward with legislation, that might be an appropriate addition to any law that might be passed requiring something from us should also require something from the physician.
So with how the language is currently written, the physician has to determine that the risk factors presented by the woman's disease or condition are not likely to significantly affect the course of pregnancy and childbirth. The patient can request the records. There's not a requirement for direct communication. Certainly, I think there are midwives who have collaborative relationships with physicians where, with patients' consent, that information is exchanged. There's no particular format required by the law, and obviously there's no regulations requiring a certain format. With the proposed change, the physician would make an assessment of the risk factors, and that would be part of the patient's record that the patient could request and present to the midwife, who then takes it under consideration.
Thank you.
Ms. Ehrlich? Oh, sorry.
I'm first.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Rosanna Davis with California Association of Licensed Midwives. I was present at the Midwifery Task Force meeting, and if my memory is correct, after the exam was made with the physician, there was consensus that then it was the client's discretion whether to return to midwifery care or not. Is that your memory of it, or no?
There was a lot going on.
Okay.
So I think unless there's even more drastic change, because we did not talk about changing the language up above, requiring that the woman be in normal pregnancy and childbirth, there has to be a provision that if she falls outside of that, there's a referral. So
Oh yes, of course.
that's how I understood the discussions.
What?
Is it not always her choice whether she decides to stay with the physician? She doesn't have to return.
Well, that's what we want, is that she has the choice to return if it's in the scope of practice of the midwife.
But I hear you asking it, is that legislated?
The way that it's currently written is that she can't return to care with the midwife unless she gets the exam, or if the physician determines that it is not appropriate.
I think what's going to wind up having to happen is that you're going to have to read a chart, and you're going to have to look at the doctor's assessment, because unless the woman says, how likely is this to affect the course of my pregnancy and my delivery? What is this percentage? Can you document that in my chart? Or what are my risk factors? What's the percentage of it? The doctor's not going to write that, period. I mean, after 30 years, I can tell you that's not going to get written in that way.
Right.
There's going to be high risk. Well, if you have spotting in a pregnancy, that's a high risk pregnancy. So the levels of risk are not well delineated. So that means that it's going to be incumbent on the midwife to make the determination after evaluating the records that they obtain from the physician at the request of the client. I don't think you can legislate the doctor having to write that kind of a statement.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing, we're kind of getting into is a place that we can't really even speak to what this is going to look like by the time it gets out of the legislature.
For sure.
And so mostly we could save ourselves a little bit of energy by communicating with our state representatives for what's important in the bill, and getting consumer groups also to advocate for what's important for women, so that we get a better crafting of a workable arrangement out of this next round of legislation. What do you have to add, Karen?
First of all, in what Ms. Webb read, I don't hear that it's that different from what we have already, except that it would be more in statute. Do you understand what my confusion is here? And you're nodding yes. So what's different?
The physician makes an assessment of the risk factors.
That was already in the bill. In the legislation.
May I finish?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
The physician is not doing that last part, determining that the risk factors presented by the woman's disease or condition are not likely to significantly affect the course of pregnancy and childbirth. The midwife takes this information and will be responsible for making the assessment that this client is appropriate for continued midwifery care.
So based on the physician's chart notes that the midwife will get back through the woman, the midwife will, it sounds to me like it's fairly similar to what was in the CNM bill last year, where the CNM was required to refer the woman, and then the CNM would evaluate the risk factors when she got the woman back and decide whether she was still appropriate for midwifery care. Is that kind of the understanding?
So in other words, the physician who does the exam and the history, I presume, is not making a determination per se about whether this is okay to stay with midwifery care and out of hospital.
Right.
So, say that again?
No, they were before.
They were, according to how that...
No, they were determining whether it was likely to affect the course of their pregnancy and their
Right.
delivery. It's not the same thing.
But that still is what we're talking about, that the doctor is still going to make a determination about whether it is likely to negatively affect her.
So the doctor, he or she is going to say something to the client that's come for the recommendation. The client has now the recommendation, and now with the information makes a determination of what she is going to do. Now,
in
midwives-
consultation with the midwife.
in consultation with the midwife. But this is it. Midwives need to be aware of what's going on as we go forward, that this is on the table, so they need to be maybe that much more engaged in the process. But I also would like to ask the question about the term normal, and if that's not in statute, if you can come up with another word, please.
Yeah.
It is in statute.
Well, when you write the new one, could you come up with a different word, please?
Yeah. All right.
I have a couple of other, I'm still unclear on exactly what is different.
The difference is the midwife is going to make the determination
The
rather
final
than the physician.
determination along with the woman.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to reinforce what Tosi said about what is the physician required to do, because if a physician realizes that this pregnant woman is coming to him or her to hear what the risk factors are that she has, is the doctor going to be required to make that determination, or to even do that exam and assessment?
I think we've been over 1,000 times that we can't require the doctor to do anything. He can either
We can
see her or
require
not
the
see her.
midwife to do all kinds of things.
Yeah.
I would like to see if there is some way of making this firmer in terms of what the doctor can do. And one of the thoughts I have is, if indeed this has something to do with how is the midwife going to get the information back from the doctor? And I realize that this could make some doctors just say, oh, here's this piece of paper you want me to fill out. I'm not going to do it at all. But is more like the midwife's recommendation to her potential client is to have this evaluation by a physician, that she fill out a recommendation form that is a carbon. It has a carbon form. that has some kind of a checklist box on it. Do I have any conditions that would, you can determine would negatively affect the outcome? That just is a record that the doctor has done what the woman is asking, and then she can take that back to her midwife.
Yeah, I think what needs to happen at this point is that midwives need to stay really engaged as this moves forward. Is this a this year projection for a change, or is it something that's going to not happen really until next year?
We're trying to work this into the sunset bill.
Okay,
So
so
that's
it's
the
really
first
important
year.
for midwives to stay engaged now and make sure that your representatives understand your concerns.
I would just like to state if anywhere people are required within the system to submit these transfer reports, we should be able to create some kind of a consultation report.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments on this agenda item?
Could I just have a little clarification? So what will be in the statute? Later the list is going to get written. What's actually, we don't know obviously, but the idea right now, this is that this process will be in the statute? What you just outlined, that the woman goes and gets assessed and then comes back and discusses with the midwife whether she has those risk factors, whether she can continue care with the midwife? Is that what's being suggested to go into statute?
Changing this requirement that the physician make a determination about what those risk factors mean. So they make an assessment of the risk factors. The midwife obtains that information and considers that when determining whether this client is appropriate for continued midwifery care.
So that's what will go into the statute, and then later
well,
the
not
list.
in those words,
Right.
but that's
Right.
the concept
Okay.
that we're working with.
Okay.
So, it's a recognition that midwives are professionals, they have a standard of care, and this is a piece of information that they should be using in determining whether this client is appropriate for continued midwifery care.
And then the board would then craft a regulation that would be the list. That's not being projected to be in statute.
Right.
And is prior C-section designated to be part, is that going to be written into statute, or is that going to be something that would be included and still be up for discussion and regulation?
For purposes of the meeting, the task force meeting, that was contemplated being in regulation, not in statute.
Okay,
So a prior cesarean section would be one of the triggering factors that would require the potential
consultation.
client to have the physician consult.
Okay. But the feeling then is that it would be easier to get that consult if we're not requiring the physician to make a determination on a risk status? Is that
Right.
the thought? Okay.
Megan Boken, licensed midwife.
Hi.
Apologize if this has been covered. I live in an area where physicians won't readily consult or see women. So is there something that is going to be in the statute protecting the midwife when a referral is made and a physician refuses to consult, period?
So a couple of points of discussion on that. There's nothing restricting the use of telehealth.
Okay.
Okay. There's nothing right now requiring the woman to say, I plan to have a home birth and I want your assessment on this. That should be something that should be able to be discussed without it being a hindrance. And I'm convinced we will get there. But the woman can have some questions in mind about the risk factors posed for the course of pregnancy and delivery to have those evaluated. So those are some points of discussion that were talked about.
Okay.
But, you know, the use of telehealth is an option.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Shaman Perez, licensed midwife in Los Angeles. I just wanted to say this sounds like a great rewording, because what it does, and what I see in Los Angeles anyway, in my practice, and I do have great doctors that I can collaborate within my community. But what this does do is, if we know what is outside of our normal, and we send somebody for a consult, or we send them out for a referral, and that doctor does not have to take the liability and say, of course he's going to say she shouldn't have a VBAC, because if she's one in a billion that has an issue, I can turn around and say, well, you said that it was okay for her to do this. So now this puts the liability and the responsibility of determining whether or not she really falls into my scope. Now he says, you know, here are the stats or whatever. And now it's my responsibility to say, I don't know if this particular gestational diabetic woman is really a good candidate for an out-of-hospital delivery. So I think I think that rewording it this way helps me have a better relationship with all my local doctors and within my community, because they don't have to take my liability.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Olmstead, licensed midwife. I agree with everything that was just said with that. I just want to add my voice of support for what Jocelyn Dugan said, because I think she's, we have plenty of midwives. We have fewer consumers. We have fewer consumers present right now, and I think that was one of the big things that was taken away from women with this new law. It was beneficial in many ways, but I think that the woman's autonomy and being able to make her own healthcare decisions and make a decision for midwifery care, I think, is important. So I just wanted to lend my voice of support to that.
Thank you.
I'd like to, if I may, just agree with the last two comments. I think you have no idea the freedom this language gives you, and I think the focus, instead of requiring the physician to do anything, it should be sitting with your client and coming up with that. They come in with this list. What about this, doctor? What about this? And with that list of questions to ask and get answers from. And then you use that and you make your determination. And the doctor doesn't have to write anything. What is my risk of rupture? This is my second one. What does the statistics say? And get the come up and formulate that, rather than a checklist for the doctor to have to sign and all of that nonsense. That's not going to happen, and I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I agree, and I would hope that maybe the California Association of Licensed Midwives might have an active role in creating these tools for midwives and the clients in the state.
Great. Any other public comment? Any other comment from MAC members?
Well, I just have one more. For example, is there any talk about adding breech and twins into this list? Because you could send somebody. I've had clients who had 2 hospital birth vaginal breaches with no problems, and now they're expecting a 3rd baby. This baby is breech also, and what is the chances of her having a normal vaginal birth again? Or a woman who's had a 10-pound baby vaginally, and now she's expecting an 8-pound breech. What is her chances? I mean,
Currently, there's no talk about removing that from the list that exists in statute.
Hello, I'm Tanya Smith-Johnson, president of CFAM, so I'm here representing clients and consumers. And I just want to say this is exciting development. I think the main thing is, from consumers, we want to know that ultimately, even if we go get this referral from a doctor, they see us, even if they say, I think this is an awful idea to do a VBAC, and they're not liable. The client can take that, go back to their midwife, and still ultimately have the decision to say, I still want to go forward. I heard what the doctor had to say. What do you have to say as a midwife? Do you still think that you can take me as a client? If that midwife agrees, then between the client and the midwife, they make that decision and move forward. And the midwife doesn't have to worry about, far as getting in trouble, or as long as she's done, it's very clear what the steps are that she has to take, and that she doesn't, there's no liability on the doctor, but the midwife doesn't feel like she is doing anything wrong. As long as all that is very clear, and it's still ultimately up to the client, this is fantastic, and we're excited, and we're very excited as CFAM and consumers to be on board for whatever push needs to happen for this to happen. Thank you.
Have any other comments?
I'd just like to thank everybody, the midwives and the OBs who came together and the lawyers who came together to do this. I'm sure that was not an easy meeting, and it seems like this is moving in a good direction. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. No further comment? Great. We're going to move on to the next agenda item, which I think mostly we've covered, but it's an update on continuing regulatory efforts required by Assembly Bill 1308. Ms. Webb?
Thank you. So the regulations to define pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy and significant disease arising from the pregnancy have not moved forward in light of the impasse, mostly involving VBACs, and the requirement for the physician determination. If a legislative change is successful, which you hear we are working hard to try to move this, then board staff is prepared to move forward on the regulations. So we stand by.
Is there any public comment on that or board comment? Matt comment? All right. Seeing none, we're going to move forward to agenda item 7, which is an update on the midwifery assistant regulations. Ms. Webb?
So that's me too. And the midwifery assistant regulations went through some amendments which were subject to a 15-day comment period, which concluded on February 27th. And there were no public comments. And in addition to some non-substantive changes, the amendments were made to incorporate the CDC's infection control guidelines by reference, to reorganize the training requirements for clarity. It did not add additional requirements, but it just a recognition they could be more easy to read with some adjustments. So we did that. We included a definition for a qualified midwife assistant, because for our medical assistants, if they go through training and become certified, then they can be a qualified medical assistant, allowing them to train other medical assistants under certain conditions. So we did the same thing for midwife assistants. And we clarified the requirements for accrediting organizations that certify midwife assistants. So the regulations are currently with the Department of Consumer Affairs for review. Once they complete the review, they will go through the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency and the Department of Finance, and then they'll be submitted to the Office of Administrative Law for review and approval. And once they're approved, they'll go to the Secretary of State for formal incorporation into our California Code of Regulations.
Do you have like an estimated time frame?
I would estimate 90 to 120 days for Office of Administrative Law approval.
Okay.
We did make a request that they become effective on the date they're submitted to the Secretary of State. Hopefully that happens. If not, then they become effective quarterly. So that could change the effective date.
So maybe by the fall.
I think that's a very fair estimate.
Great. Is there any comment from Midwifery Advisory Council members?
I know this has taken a long time to get to that point, and I just want to thank you for making sure this happens. I mean, this has been a major issue that needed to get redone, and it's getting to there. And It almost is like a model for every other assistant program in the state. So I don't know if the state wants to do that, but it sounds like you've created a model for sure.
Well, unfortunately, I was able to model quite a bit from the medical assistants.
Well, it's great.
That's fantastic. Any
I can't
public
take credit for that.
any public comment? All right. Seeing none, we're going forward. All right. Ms. Simoes is going to update us on legislation that pertains to midwives.
Okay, well, Karen kind of already covered this in her public comment, but the only bill that's out there right now is the CNM spot bill. So it's AB 1612 Burke. And so at this point in time, it's just a spot bill, but it will be amended to include, it'll probably be very similar from AB 1306 from last year. And as has already been said, if we can come to some consensus on the legislative changes that we've already discussed, we will be working with Senate BMP to hopefully get that in our sunset bill. And Sarah Mason, who came up during public comment, will be the person in that office that we're working with. So
by a spot bill, you mean it's like a placeholder until they write the language?
Basically, it doesn't make any substantive changes. It's just changing little things, and it's just holding a place for that legislation.
All right. Tosi?
Is the proposed legislation similar or substantially the same as their last legislative attempt?
I mean, I don't know what it is yet because right now it just crosses off words that don't really make a difference. And so the real language will be put in at a later date. Basically what they do is they just do those little changes to get an actual bill number, and then they can put in that language later. So I haven't seen what's going to go in the bill yet. So
Okay, thank you.
Is there any public comment? Other comment from MAC members? Nope. All right. Thank you. All right. Agenda item 9 is the update on the Licensed Midwives Annual Report Task Force. Ms. Lowe.
Okay. At the December MAC meeting, we provided a brief update on the survey that board staff had sent out in October regarding feedback on how midwives would like to report the required data for the LMAR. As we mentioned at the last meeting, the survey, we did not get very good response back to it, and it was a recommendation of the MAC at the last meeting that we provide additional outreach and try to get some more feedback before proceeding with making any changes to the LMAR. Board staff was able to create an online survey to ask basically the two questions. Do you want to continue to report cumulatively as we are now with some enhancements to the current system, or do you want to move to a prospective data system that the board would then create and hand off to OSHPD? Before I get into any of the results of that survey, we still have not had a very good feedback or response rate to it.
There's still time to respond to it, correct?
Correct. So what board staff did was, in order for us to reach the most amount of midwives possible, we provided a link from our website for when you log into the LMAR system. So midwives would be directed to the survey. They have the option of completing it or skipping if they don't want to participate, and then they would be directed to the LMAR. So as of today, we have only received 105 responses to the survey. We reached out to OSHPD this morning, and they are still expecting at least 221 midwives to report. So the LMAR closes at the end of March. At this point, I can go over the results of the survey, but because there's a possibility of having 221 more, it may be beneficial to wait to see what the results are at that point. What that does mean, though, is it would not be again presented until the next meeting, which is in August. So
I'd like to hear what you have.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. So of the 105 responses that we received, 78 votes have come in for the option 1. And what we asked...
Same.
I'm sorry?
That's the stay the same option?
Yes. So what the questions specifically say, option number 1, continue to report data accumulatively at the end of each calendar year as has been done since 2007. If this option is favorable to the midwifery community, board staff will begin revising the system to add additional questions, prompts, and formatting to allow for more reliable reporting and better ease of use. Data would continue to be submitted to the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, OSHPD, who would then provide the board with the annual summary at the end of the reporting period. Feedback from all interested parties would be welcome prior to revising the system to ensure the reporting tool would meet the needs of all entities utilizing the summary of data available each year. That was option 1. Option 2 was to report data prospectively throughout the year by entering client data as it becomes available. If this option is favorable to the midwifery community, board staff will begin creating a new reporting system similar to current nationally recognized research data registries like ManaStats. Data would continue to be submitted to OSHPD, who would then provide the board with the annual summary at the end of the reporting period. Feedback from all interested parties would be welcome prior to revising the system to ensure the reporting tool would meet the needs of all entities utilizing the summary of data at the end of each year. So there are only 2 options that are within the board's control at this time. We either enhance what we currently have or we rebuild it. There are no other options for the board staff to do anything else at this point. So option 1, which is to continue the way it is currently, we've received 78 responses requesting to go that route. Option 2, to change the system to a prospective data system, we've only received 27 responses. Again, there's 221 possibilities of receiving another answer to either of these questions, which could skew the results significantly either way. So at this point, board staff does not feel it's appropriate to take any steps in either direction until at least the closing of the LMAR reporting system.
So my thought is that then we're to August before we make a decision about enhance or rewrite. Ms. Webb, is it possible for the MAC to decide today that we're going to direct staff to go one way or the other based on the results, or we want to wait until August till we get the results? What are our options today for action? Do we have to wait till August to decide how we're going to proceed?
You could direct staff that if the majority of midwives vote one way or the other, then a draft proposal is made based on that to present at the August meeting.
It seems like the first step is to have a task force, a meeting, right? So can the MAC create that task force and say that they'll meet regardless of which option is the better one, which one gets chosen? There's going to have to be a task force either way.
Wait. If it is in fact that the decision of whether you're going to go with Plan A1 or Plan 2 is going to be the decision of the midwifery community, then you're going to have to wait to make that determination. If it were that we should take as input to our decision making what the midwifery community decided and made it our own decision, that's another question. So I don't know that we're wedded to take the decision as made by the midwifery community. It was expected that that's what we would want to do. So I don't know how we can do anything other than wait for the end of March and then either direct staff based on the March results to make be prepared so that they will have something ready based on those statistics if that is what we in fact decide is going to rule our judgment. So that's what I'm not clear on. Is the rule of our judgment based 100% on what the midwifery community has decided, or what is best practices as determined by, I don't know, whomever? I don't know the answer.
I think what my preference would be to decide that we're going to have a task force meeting between now and August to look at these results and make some decisions about what recommendations the task force would have to give the MAC in August.
So you're asking for another step. You're asking for a task force versus staff to take in the information, decide on what the information, how the vote went, and then from that point go forward and prepare materials for you to look at. I mean, it's fine. You want to have a task force, fine. Just I don't know that.
Well, we're gonna we're going to ultimately have to have a task force one way or the other anyway, because regardless of whether we choose option 1 or option 2, there are going to be edits if we choose option 1, and if we choose option 2, there's going to be a whole lot of work in more than 1 or 2 task force meetings, I'm guessing. So
you could appoint a task force to review the results once the LMAR closes, and to work with staff to come up with proposals for the August meeting. That would be acceptable.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments on that idea? To have a task force between now and then to come up with recommendations for the August meeting?
I think it's a great idea because it'll move things along. But I also liked what the other comment was, that, you know, as the Midwifery Advisory Council, we can take into consideration what people say, but there's an awful lot of things that we have to do not because we want to do them, but because they're the right thing to do. And I feel like the task force should feel free to take into consideration what people have said, but also make up their own minds.
Well, my proposal would only be that the task force convene and hear responses from all of the interested parties, and then out of that might come a recommendation to the MAC in August, and then the MAC would ultimately make a decision about which direction to go.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'd agree with that.
Is there public comment on this? I don't see any. Ms. Lowe, would you call the roll, please?
Dr. Adams. Ms. Dugan.
Agree.
Agree.
Ms. Marcelin.
Agreed.
Ms. Yaroslavsky.
Yes.
Ms. Scarbon.
Agree.
Then that concludes my update.
All right. So on to agenda item 10.
Have to create that task force, or how does that get created?
Oh, good point.
You can do it here. You can do it at a later time, because as the chair, you create the task force.
The task force is, it's the same task force now that Natalie and I have already been. I mean, it's still the.
Who's on the task force?
I think it's just Ms. Lowe and myself at this point. And it's going to have to
The
be a
task
noticed
force
meeting,
is-
right?
The task force of 2 MAC members
Okay.
does not have to be a noticed meeting. 2 members can work with staff.
Right, but if we want to get public input, then it has to be a noticed meeting, which was my intent. That was the intent, was to get interested parties' comments.
Okay, then that's an interested parties meeting as opposed to a task force meeting.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so now what? A task force meeting would do the same thing if we noticed it, correct?
You might want to do your task force and then call for an interested parties meeting. You might want to take and collect the data. You might want to take a look and see what you need.
The interested parties meeting should come,
After.
in my opinion, after the MAC
Decides
has-
what they're going to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Well, I need there to be at least 2 people from the MAC then, because I think that it needs more input than just mine.
I'll help you.
Okay, Ms. Hunter. All right. Okay. All right, so now we're moving to agenda item 10, which is the Midwifery Advisory Council 3-year term vacancy. Ms. Lowe?
In December, board staff sent notice to all licensed midwives, subscribers on the board's subscribers alert list, and posted information on the board's website indicating that the board was seeking applications from licensees to fill one licensed midwife position on the MAC for a term set to expire on June 30th, 2020. Following today's meeting, the nominees will be presented to the board at the April 27th and 28th quarterly board meeting for final approval. And that is just one nominee, by the way. Staff has received 4 applications for the vacant position. Ms. Megan Bochum, Bochum, thank you. Ms. Jessica Johnson, Ms. Kelly Olmsted, and Ms. Shamin Perez. Prior to requesting nominations from the MAC, if any of the applicants are in attendance and would like to introduce yourself and make a statement to the MAC, you may come forward now. One at a time, preferably.
Hi, I'm Kelly Olmsted, licensed midwife. I actually feel like I am, and my area is very well represented by the existing Midwifery Advisory Council. So I would like to withdraw my nomination in favor of having somebody from a different area, such as Southern California, be on the MAC.
Thank you.
My name is Shaman Perez, and I'm from Southern California. I actually have been in midwifery for some time, working with other midwives as an assistant. I have 8 children, and I wanted to wait until my children were older before I began my midwifery program. In 2013, I graduated and became licensed. I went to the National College of Midwifery. I trained under, I'm sure most people know, Shelley Gerard, Carol Gauchi, Renee, the midwife in Santa Clarita. I've worked in home birth setting and a birth center setting. My desire as a midwife, my biggest desire was to serve a population of women who haven't, in my particular area, been served in Los Angeles. I am I think I may be the only Mexican licensed midwife in Los Angeles, and I just have a deep desire to serve the women of color in our community. That's a large population. I want to do whatever I can to help midwives, including myself. I'm working with someone. I now am a Medi-Cal provider, but I just opened a birth center. I'm learning how to navigate this with Medi-Cal. Trailblazer, yay! And my goal is to be able to figure this out with my fellow midwives so that we can all serve this community of women that desperately needs to be served. I am getting more women right now than I can actually take into my practice in the area that I'm in. And I just have a deep desire to do whatever I can to, I think I told Carrie I have a shovel and I'm happy to bring it and start, digging and do whatever we need to do to work together and just create a better situation for us to work with. And I personally have had great experiences with the OBs in my area. I've gone in anytime there's been any conflict and introduced myself to them and just sat down with them. I actually went to all the local hospitals and asked them if they understood about our new transport forms and what they mean, and because they're very reluctant to do anything with them. But I've just feel like it's been a good thing implemented for us and a peacemaking type thing actually in the long run. So I am also bilingual. I have students that are women of color. My daughter is now enrolled in the National College of Midwifery. She just finished her first year and she's working in our birth center as well. Not quite, I don't know what else to really say, but I'm here if I'm needed, and I'd love to represent, our community in Southern California, and also the women of color.
Thank you. Does any MAC members have questions? No. I just have one. So it sounds like you're super busy. Will you be able to commit to being here 3 times a year?
I would absolutely commit to being here 3 times a year.
So you have backup for the birth center?
Yes, I do. The other thing that's really nice about my community is that all of the midwives really work together to support each other today I have 5 women in dates, and Tiffany Gallo has a birth center in Santa Clarita. Her women all delivered, and she's on call for me all day today. So we have plenty of notice for our meetings.
Thank you. Anything else? Super, thank you. There we go. Megan.
I'm Megan Bokum, licensed midwife. I'm from the Central Coast, so about halfway in between LA and San Francisco. We have a relatively small population. We have relatively hostile working environment. I remember coming here as a student, and my midwife preceptor would bring me here as part of her education for me. And I think now that I'm licensed since 2011, kind of have my practice under control, the idea of representing an area that has a very different experience than what the MAC might be seeing or hearing is intriguing to me, because sometimes the recommendations and the statutes that come down almost don't apply to where I live, because it's kind of no man's land.
Where are you?
I'm
exactly?
in right south of San Luis Obispo.
Okay, thank you.
So if I need a physician consultation, I need to call a physician in Southern California. I don't have physicians who will consult with me. Or a woman would need to drive. So it's a little bit of a different situation. And so I think I want to get in on the policy, affecting policy a little bit, to see how to lasso in some of those groups, to be, because those are all interested parties, and there should be a way for us to offer care to women in a really collaborative way. And it's not happening, at least where I live. Where I live, if a woman says that she wants a home birth, the MD writes in her chart she's not allowed to call his office. So it's very different. And that's that. I don't have any prepared statement. If anybody has any questions of me, I'm a mom with 4 kids. I'm also in IBCLC. I have a very small practice. I do a lot of support groups. I am an ardent supporter of VBAC. I've had 2 myself. And that's it.
So I have the same question for you, which is, if you were appointed to the MAC, do you have coverage so that you can attend 3 times a year?
Absolutely. I think the midwives in my area would be thrilled beyond belief if we had representation at this level, because we've felt as a group that we were not well represented, and I think they would all really rally behind me.
So great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, at this time, if the MAC could.
Wait, I need to know if there are any. Yes, we do. Sorry. I'm very short. Yeah, I didn't. Actually cannot see you when you're sitting.
I know you can't. I don't know. It's fine. I'm Jessica Johnson, licensed midwife. I'm from Modesto, California. And my region, I serve a 90-minute range from Modesto. We are extremely conservative, both medically and culturally, and it is a very, very different climate. One in which I do echo the statements of my other midwife, where sometimes the legislations that come down, they don't always apply, or doctors are unwilling to comply with them because of personal beliefs. So sometimes it's very difficult for us to practice in our area. I have a home birth practice, and I also co-own a birth center with my colleague Heather Groves, and we are trying our very best to provide as good care as we can in a very conservative and sometimes abjectly hostile environment. So having worked on some of the legislation for our laws gave me a lot of great insight, lobbying at the Senate and spending some time working with the development of the new legislation really made me feel like our region was being well represented and that we were able to have our voice heard as far as what our region is like. And I would like the opportunity to continue to do that on the advisory council as well.
Same question.
Same question. Yes, I have a lot of backup. So as I said, I co-own my birth center with my colleague Heather Groves, and she's backing me up today for my mommies and dates. But we have a very tight midwifery collective in the area, and so we're able to back each other up for circumstances such as this.
Super, thank you. Any MAC members have questions? No. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, if the MAC could please consider the nominees and make a recommendation to fill the vacant licensed midwife position on the MAC.
I would nominate Shaman Perez to be a MAC member.
Second.
No. Third. Are there any other nominations?
They're all really, really good. I'm
All
really torn, and
excellent.
I know
They're all
everybody
excellent,
here
excellent.
personally, so this is really tough. I need a minute to think.
All right.
Yes,
I just want to say that I know none of the nominees. I was impressed by everything you said, and that this will be a really difficult vote no matter what. We have long felt that Southern California was very ill represented and by midwives on the council, and so having you all show up from different areas is
It's really wonderful.
really wonderful for all of us. Thank you.
I'm gonna just sit.
Yeah,
Call the vote?
No, I want to make a nomination. I'm just trying to decide because I do feel like it's really important that we have somebody a group that's underrepresented, and I think that from a non-urban community or non-suburban, and Megan, welcome.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. So we can move on now, right? To the
Call
go
the
ahead.
vote
So,
regarding
Ms.
Ms. Perez.
Well, she's going to provide the brief overview and.
Okay, so for the first nomination, I'll call the vote for Shaman Perez. Dr. Adams,
No.
Ms. Dugan,
Yes.
Ms. Holzer,
Yes.
Ms. Marcelin,
Yes.
Ms. Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
Ms. Baravan.
Yes.
So there is a majority, and we will not need to take the vote for Ms. Bochum.
Thank you.
But I'd like to echo what you've heard already up here. I've sat on this commission or committee and been involved with this board for a long time. And to see the level of participants that were willing to put themselves out there, willing to travel for this meeting, the breadth of experience and value that you bring to us as a whole, I really appreciate. And I just hope that each and every one of you will continue to stay involved with whatever you can do. We need your help, and we need your voices, and we need your input. So I want to congratulate everyone that ran. It's like the Oscars, you know. It's an honor to be nominated. But I honestly mean that you all are amazing women, and I want to thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Barbara. And I'd like to echo that because we can only choose one person today. And so don't hesitate to apply again because more positions come up. So it's really important to stay engaged. And if you can't serve on this body, see what you can do with your state organizations and your national organizations, because all of that makes a huge difference. And we really, really appreciate you being here. Yeah. On the Elmar, when you, get your friends and midwifery partners to please fill out that survey so we know, so we're more informed about how we should proceed. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right.
Can I just make one comment? And thank you all for showing up. I was nominated to my position here, but there were at least 6 or 8 other very well-qualified people, but I was the only one who showed up at the MAC meeting, so by default, here I sit, and thank you for taking over my spot. This is my last MAC meeting.
And given that, I'd like to thank Ms. Marceline, not only for her service here on the MAC, which by some standards has been fairly brief, one 3-year term, but for close to 40 years as a midwife who has trained many midwives. And I know that those of us that know you know the contribution that you've made and very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope you keep coming. And
probably one of the closest people.
And
I
Ms.
wanna thank you
Perez,
as well.
welcome.
I want to thank you as well, Tosi. You changed my life, so thank you. You're the reason I'm here as well.
Thank you.
All right. Agenda item 11, program update, please, Ms. Lowe.
Okay, so my program update is going to be very brief. The first thing is, as Barbara mentioned, I would like to also remind all midwives who have not yet submitted their LMARs to do so as soon as possible. It will close at the end of March. Board staff will be sending a reminder notice out to all licensed midwives on Monday, which will give you about 2 weeks to get those LMARs in. A reminder of the importance of submitting the LMAR timely is that once the reporting system closes, any LMAR reports submitted after that time will not be compiled into the annual report. So if 209 midwives do not submit their report until after the close, those will not go into the stats that are available in the summary. Moving on to the licensing statistics, which are provided on page 22 of your packets. As you can see in the last quarter, there was a pretty significant increase in the number of applications received, which is a good sign. It's a spike where the average has normally been about 4 to 5 applications. This last quarter, we received 10. No rhyme or reason, but it is nice to see. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them on the licensing stats. Otherwise, I'll move on to enforcement.
I do have a question.
Okay.
On the number of delinquent licenses, how long does a license stay delinquent?
Okay.
And is the purpose of having a license that's delinquent not removed? Well, I'll get there after you answer the first part.
Okay. Once a license expires, it will go into a delinquent status at midnight on that expiration date. It will remain in a delinquent status for up to 5 years from that expiration date, which would allow the midwife to renew their license during that time by completing a renewal form and paying any past renewal fees. After 5 years, that license would then go into a canceled status automatically. And if the midwife wished to come back and practice in California in order to renew or reinstate their license, they would actually have to submit an initial application and go through the initial application process.
So is there an education component of continuing education that one would have to provide, or is just filling out the form and paying the fight fee?
At the time of renewal, it asks if they are in compliance with the continuing education requirements, which is 36 hours for the previous renewal period. So when they came back to renew, they would answer the question. We do not ask that documentation is provided at that time. However, midwives are now being audited in the continuing education audit monthly. And if they were selected for that audit, they would then need to show documentation that they could comply.
Okay, so the 5 years is just because it's 5 years and not because you want to maintain the licensing. Once that one has a delinquent license, they can't practice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so then it doesn't matter. Second part is fine.
Okay, I have a question about the continuing education. How long do midwives need to hold on to their continuing education documentation? Like, do you only audit for their current term of licensure. Like, say their license expires in March of 2018, would you look at just their last renewal, or does it go back 7 or 10 years like IRS does?
If audited, the question is that at the time of renewal, can you comply with the requirements, which is 36 hours in the prior renewal period? So technically you could be audited. You should hold your documentation, I think, for a minimum of 4 years, because after 4 years, then you would not be audited for your previous renewal cycle.
Got it. Thank you.
Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife. I'm wishing for a category of retired. I've retired from clinical.
With honors.
Yeah. I'm currently retired from clinical. I am maintaining my license for many numbers of reasons. And I also can imagine that at some point I'm going to not want to have to pay those fees, and I'm not going to want to go ahead with, but I don't want to really feel like I've surrendered my license.
So there is currently a retired status
There is a
available
retired
to licensed
status?
midwives, which exempts them from the renewal fees.
Okay.
However, while on retired status, no practice is allowed.
That's understandable. Okay. It says by the fact that there's nothing here, does that mean there are no current midwives under retired status?
That is not what that means. I know for sure that there is one on retired status. So if you are requesting, or the MAC requests that we provide that data, we can do that as well.
Okay.
So if you're in retired status, and then 2 years later you decide you want to practice again, is the process the same as if you had a delinquent license to get your license reinstated, or is it different?
Yes and no. So in order to reinstate your license from a retired status, in this case for midwives, you would have to submit a application to restore your license to full and active status from retired status. That form would require you to submit an application. You would be required to pay the current renewal fee, and you would have to complete the same questions as on a renewal form. Can you comply with the continuing education requirements? Have you been convicted since your last renewal?
Have you been convicted?
Of anything?
Correct.
Oh.
So would the continuing education requirement just apply to the previous 2 years? Say they were in retired status for 4 years. Do they have to do 72?
It would be for the past 2 years.
Past 2 years. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's helpful. We find out new things about our licenses all the time. All right. Continue, please.
Okay. Are there any further questions on the licensing statistics? Okay. So moving on to the enforcement statistics, the hospital transfer reporting form statistics, which are on page 23. I don't have much to mention, except in the last quarter, we did receive 47 for licensed midwives. There were 2 submitted for certified nurse midwives, and 0 were submitted for unlicensed or unknown. So the numbers for certified nurse midwives are lowering, which is good. Maybe the outreach is helping. And then also unlicensed unknown has decreased as well. Are there any questions on this?
Maybe CNMs are informing the hospital, you don't need to submit one for me.
Right.
Nicole.
So I do have a question. When I was looking at this, the hospital reporting forms were received from licensed midwives, or the hospital reporting forms do we receive forms from hospitals?
Yes.
Should the numbers at all jive?
With what?
So the only comparison really that we have right now to compare these numbers is with the LMAR data that's submitted that indicates how many planned out-of-hospital births resulted in a transfer to hospital. So right now we can somewhat compile those numbers and see if we're getting enough reports for all of the data that's being submitted in the LMAR. But these numbers are reflecting what we have received directly submitted from the hospital.
So my concern was that the hospitals were not reporting.
Which we did.
If you have more if you have more midwives reporting than hospitals reporting, then the hospitals need to be better educated or informed that they need to get on the train.
So these numbers are all representative of what is coming from the hospital. Nothing is being submitted on these from midwives.
Okay, that's what.
But at the last LMAR, after we received the summary, we were able to compare the numbers and see that there was a significant decrease in what we receive versus what we should.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's Calm was mentioning that they're doing an outreach. I could be wrong. The hospitals, no. Disregard that statement.
No, but what I'm wondering is if we should be, if you should be.
Which that's been our plan all along, is that once the regulations were in place, then we would proceed with outreach, and we've discussed that several times. But until that, there was discussion on revising that form and what would be provided and requested. It's gone back and forth of now we can do it, now we're waiting, now we can do it, now we're waiting.
Well, my concern is you did outreach to the providers of medical devices, oxygen and whatever, that they needed to provide as requested by midwives to receive the materials that they needed to do their job. It may be time also to consider doing something similar to hospitals, that they need to start stepping up to return forms so that we can have a better picture of what's going on out there, or more accurate picture, not a better, but a more accurate picture.
I will say that there was an amazing article written in the winter newsletter for the board that did outline the hospital transfer reporting form. That was written by myself. That's why I say it was so amazing.
I'm sure it was superior as far as the article goes. I'm sure it was excellent. It must have slipped my eyes. But by the same token, I would just be concerned that the people that would have had the opportunity of seeing that wonderful demonstrative article that was so well articulated.
Thank you very much.
As to what needs to be done. The hospitals are not reading that article, that letter. So you might want to take that and reprint it and send it out to Hospital Association and say, send it to your people.
Or send one to each hospital administrator or something.
No, but Hospital Association can do that for you.
I think it's time, even though we don't have a perfect form yet, I think it's time to do the outreach to hospitals and get them on board doing what they're required to do.
Well, one of the advantages of doing that is that then they will be letting you know what they do and do not like about the form and how it serves their needs, and there'll be more information available when the form gets to be in its final state.
We do encourage midwives to do individual outreach. We don't have the resources to reach out to the hospitals, but I do remember the Hospital Association saying that they were doing some active outreach for that.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions regarding the hospital transfer statistics? Okay. Moving on to the enforcement statistics, which are provided on page 24 of your packets. As you can see, the number of complaints received this quarter was minimal. There were no referrals for disciplinary or criminal action, and there really is no other significant changes to point out. But if you have any other questions or any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
So I have another question. So total number of complaints received was 7.
That was in the first quarter.
Okay. Total number of complaints closed was 2. No, but I'm just looking at quarter 1.
Mm-hmm.
So down below, currently open investigation 7. Shouldn't the number be? I mean, then it says the third number is total number of complaints referred to investigation 6. Total number of investigations currently open. Shouldn't that be 6 versus 7?
Not necessarily, because the numbers represent what came in that quarter and the status of where they're at that quarter.
Okay.
But we could have received them in a previous quarter.
Thank you.
So if there's no other questions, that does conclude my update.
All right. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? All right. Seeing none, I think we're almost at the end of this. All right. So we need agenda items for the next Midwifery Advisory Council meeting. Do any MAC members have additions to what's listed here under agenda item 12? Midwifery Task Force update on AB 1308, update on midwifery assistant regulations, update on the midwifery legislation, update on the LMAR task force, and update on the midwifery program, which is what we just heard. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
I would like an update on the school opening, on where the status is. And will they also be in a situation to offer courses for remediation?
We haven't discussed
Well,
that yet.
I'm just
Yeah.
update.
Does anybody else have something to add to that?
Oh, I have a request. Rosanna Davis with CALM. So I get various reports throughout the year about obstacles to care for our licensed midwife clients. Is that something we could discuss at a MAC meeting? Can I give a couple of examples? For instance, Lucille Packard Children's Hospital has a policy prohibiting referrals from licensed midwives after positive prenatal screens. And so it can take up to 2 weeks for a woman to get in to see an obstetrician and then perinatology to get the care that she needs.
Okay, I have a question, because it's my understanding that the antenatal screening department refers people directly, no?
Remember, hold on now.
Oh, sorry.
Because this is not an agendized item. So the discussion has to be around whether to put it on a future agenda item.
Does anybody have a problem with putting that on as an agenda item? All right, we'll put it there then.
Okay,
it's on the
thank you.
list. Thank you.
Being on the agenda is, and will we be provided with some of those obstacles, other examples, prior to the meeting?
Would CALM
So that
be
we know what
interested
we're
in maybe
looking
doing
at.
that presentation?
Yes, I can compile.
I'm looking for
some of
something
those
written
and
that would come out that I
present
could.
them beforehand for review.
There's a way that the data can come out and be included in the, if you're going to have a PowerPoint presentation or something, so it could be included with our agenda and our board packet that we get a week in advance, so we could read the material and be ready for questions. That would be helpful.
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. All right. Is there any further public comment? Any other agenda items from the MAC? Seeing none, we're gonna. I'm quick. I have to go home and deliver lambs. Sure.
So I'll take a moment of personal privilege and want to wish Carrie, who is getting married this month.
No,
May. Oh, May. Sorry, I have her married off already.
Not this month.
No, sorry.
Not ready yet.
I have to remember what month I'm in. Really, congratulations on behalf of the MAC. Good luck.
Thank you. Surprise me. Thank you. All right. Since there's no further public comment or order of business, this meeting's now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.